My name is Chuck Wolf. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station, WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolf@cjwolf.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and welcome to the Emotion Roadmap, my live streaming YouTube, sponsored in part by the Simsbury Media Group. And I want to welcome all of you who have tuned in. I know that many of you know that I'm going to be having a guest on today, and that guest is Zorana Pringle, and she's going to call in a moment or two. I just want to tell you a little bit about the show first. The show is designed to be helpful to everybody that wants to learn more about emotional intelligence. For everybody that's ever challenged by some emotion that they're feeling. And sometimes it's emotions that you're feeling personally, or sometimes it's emotions that somebody else might be feeling who is actually someone that is close to you, or someone that you care about, or you need to work with. But in any case, there are times when somebody else's emotions are often something that make life difficult for you and for others, perhaps. So one of the things I'd like to help people with is this concept I call an emotion roadmap, which is really designed to help everybody learn how to manage more effectively their own emotions, their internal emotions, and also at the same time help you to influence and motivate and engage others. When do we need emotional intelligence? Well, honestly, all the time it's beneficial to be thinking about, how is the other person across from me feeling? How am I feeling about what I'm about to do? Is it how I want to feel? And if it's not how I want to feel, is it possible that I could change my feelings? Somehow create a different feeling, or at least a different narrative about what I'm saying to myself about how I'm feeling? What's important to do? Now, we don't have a lot of education because, honestly, emotional intelligence wasn't even considered an intelligence until 1990, when it was first written about by the pioneers in emotional intelligence. And so those pioneers actually included two people, Peter Salovey, who went on to become Yale president, and Jack Mayer, who was a University of New Hampshire psychologist. And I believe somebody who worked with Jack, who is going to be my guest today, I think just joined us. Zorana, are you on?
I am on.
Hi, Zorana. Thank you. Let me say a tiny bit about you, and then I'll ask you to say more about yourself, okay?
Sounds good.
Thanks. So Zorana, I've known for a few years from being a part of this consortium for research on emotional intelligence in organizations. A lot of the people in that group are people who are from all over the world, who have spent a lot of time learning about and researching about emotional intelligence. Some of the greatest thinkers and innovators in the world are part of that group. And I'm really privileged to have on as my guest Zorana, who actually spent time learning about emotional intelligence initially from Jack Mayer, where she was a doctoral student with Jack at the University of New Hampshire. Zorana has since gone on to work at the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale University with another colleague and friend, Mark Brackett, who also studied with Jack. Now, I've gotten to know Zorana through her speaking appearance, really, just in recent times at one of the meetings of the consortium. They meet twice a year, where Zorana presented some information about her book called The Creativity Choice. It's a book that's fascinating, and it talks all about the connection between emotion and creativity. And Zorana is probably one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met about that connection. And also, I happen to think she's brilliant because she thinks very much about emotional intelligence in much the same way as I do. We've had some conversations recently which put us on the same page in a sense about some of the ways we think about emotional intelligence. So, anyway, Zorana, could you say a little bit more about yourself then and introduce yourself to our listeners today?
Thank you for the introduction, Chuck. I am a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and I have been in this field for more than 25 years. My research is on creativity, not on just how we come up with ideas, but really, once we have the ideas, how do we do something with them to transform them and make them come alive. And in this process, emotions are an integral part, even though we sometimes instinctively think of creativity just in terms of thinking and with slogans of think different or think outside the box. But to be able to do that truly and to take those ideas to their conclusion, emotions and emotional intelligence come to play a great role.
Thank you, Zorana. And I know some of the work that you've done over the years has really looked at the science behind emotional intelligence. And a lot of the things we'll talk about, I think if people want to understand the science, that's partly what your book's about. But it's also for really anybody, I think, that wants to understand what is it about people, certain people, that allows people to actually take their ideas and finalize them in the sense of turning into a product or service or something new that they create. And I think you and I talked earlier today, and one of the things that I looked at was characteristics of people or dealing, perhaps people who will welcome change. But you said, and I'd like you to say more about this, is people who are open to experience is how it begins. You want to say a little bit about that?
So probably the most reliable and strongest finding in all of creativity research is that creative individuals tend to be open to experiences. This is a personality trait that describes typical ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, and it refers to being imaginative, being flexible in thinking and action, and being interested in intellectual ideas and aesthetic matters. And this is something that is like other personality traits, comes more naturally to some people than others, but it also turns to be increased by cultural experiences and through education, especially higher education.
So some of the tools might come from what kinds of courses that people might take. And if you say it comes from higher education, is it just the experience of a higher education in any field? Or are there particular competencies that seem to align themselves with people who can actually move from one idea to actually through the creative process to a final product or service of some type?
So the openness to experience as a trait seems to be increased in general by the experience of higher education, which exposes people to new relationships, to new places, to new ideas, and in that way can open up ways of thinking. But you have also touched in your question on something else, and that goes beyond just talking about personality and these general ways we tend to think. And that is, how do we transform ideas into something that is more tangible, something that really comes alive and can influence our lives, others around us. And that is a much bigger question. Yes, openness to experience is something that is part of who you are as an individual, makes you more likely to even engage, but this is a bigger question with lots of different parts to the answer.
Okay, well, one of the things about being open to new experiences is you might find other ways besides higher education, I imagine. But in theory, at least, when you move on to higher education, you're moving out of what's familiar from your particular neighborhood where you grew up and where you went to school. If you happen to have a lifestyle where you're pretty stable in terms of your environment. Now, of course, some people move around quite a bit as children, but for most people, they probably stay in the same place for at least a fairly stable period of time. And then so going off to school offers you new opportunities. I imagine other things might as well. If you go off and do volunteer work in some other part of the country and you expose yourself or to a new country, I imagine there's lots of different ways to open yourself up to experiences. Would you agree with that?
Yes, of course. And you are touching on some of the very big ones. Um, so there is wonderful research showing that travel, and in particular, living someplace where you did not grow up for extended period of time, makes a difference in how you're thinking, and for reasons that you have hinted at, for reasons that you gain perspective um, of people who are in a different part of the country or a different part of the world, and become able to think from inside your own box, but also from inside of somebody else's box, which becomes uh, put together outside of box thinking.
That's interesting. When I was many years ago, I had the experience. I was working with young kids in classrooms, teaching them about feelings. Interestingly enough, long before emotional intelligence was even a thing. But it's sometimes when you present something in a new way, it also opens up the door to different types of experiences. I remember the concept was something called Magic Circle, and we had a group of children that maybe some was from a special education group, another was an athlete, somebody else was a musician. I mean, these are the traits that they had even as young kids. Somebody else was very studious, somebody else was very playful, somebody was funny, but they weren't necessarily people that would be in a group together normally. But when I asked them a question about, okay, we're going to talk about anger today, and it's going to be a safe space. Everybody, whatever you say is going to be okay. And I just want to ask you, have you ever been angry before? And have you found a way to deal with it successfully? This is way back when. This was pretty interesting because it was a safe environment. And before anybody would answer, they'd have to remember what the person before them said. So you had to increase your listening skills, and you had to say things about what the feeling meant to you. And I'm just thinking about new experiences as you're talking about this. And the experience people had was, wow, I never would necessarily talk to this other person in this group before, but what a great answer they had. I'm going to talk to them after this group. I'm just really interested in the way they're dealing with anger. I'd never thought about that. I think I could use that. Anyway, I was just thinking about lots of different ways people have different kinds and new experiences and how it might open you up to being more creative.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and anything that can open the range of our experiences can become a source of new perspectives and a source of creativity. You are touching on something with your example of students who normally would not interact, on something that has been studied in organizational behavior, and applying the study of creativity to work and organizations. And researchers have found that reaching out to social circles, to others in our social circle, will have consequences for our creative work. But it's not really a matter of there is one correct kind of person to reach out to. It depends on where in the creative process you happen to be. So if you happen to be in the relatively early stages of the creative process, when you are searching for new ideas and new perspectives, it is especially helpful to reach out to those who you don't often interact with. Just like in your example of somebody who is very quiet, interacting with an athlete and a popular individual in the context of school, In the context of work, those might be people who are not in our team, who are not in our division or organization. If we broaden the circle even more, those might be individuals who we are connected with vaguely on professional social media channels such as LinkedIn or through conferences. But at those times when we are developing ideas, we are committed to something and want to elaborate on it, working very closely with those who are similar to us and who can think in similar ways is going to deepen our work.
Well, that's very helpful, and I want to talk also about the idea of the creative process in organizational life in business and in nonprofits or profitable businesses. But the idea of organizations that are trying to want people to be more creative. They want them to create, generate innovative ideas. As you said, often you'll hear the phrase "think out of the box." I really want something new, a new design that's going to give us a product or service that's going to take us to the next level in whatever field we might be in. But one of the things that strikes me, and one of the things I loved about your book, was that you talk about the creative process as having a beginning, sort of a midpoint, and an ending. And you say you don't have a blueprint or a roadmap. So it's different for different people in different circumstances. But there are some things that you've discovered along the way. And I'd like to talk about that from the perspective of, this initial uncertainty that comes across for people when they're first starting out. What are some of the things that people experience? Because as well, and I wrote this and we talked about this earlier today, but the idea for me of an emotion roadmap is like knowing what I'm likely to feel when that feeling shows up. If it's not helpful and it's actually an obstacle or something, at least, something that's causing me to pause and not allow me to move on, can I change that feeling? And, that can happen spontaneously, or I can actually know if I read your book and I understand what happens to people along the way, and I know what some of the speed bumps might be in terms of trying to get this done. What do I do when I get there? How do I plan for me to overcome things like uncertainty or anxiety, things that show up around this process? Could you talk a little bit about what you've discovered about the process of being creative from the beginning to the end?
You identified it very precisely that the start of the creative process is characterized by uncertainty. By very definition of what is creative, that's a great place to start. What is creative? Creativity is something that is in the same time original and effective. Originality is important because without it, we are repeating exact same thing that has been done before. So what's the need? And without effectiveness, we can have original ideas that simply are bizarre. So both criteria are necessary for something to be considered creative. And if we are attempting something that is to a certain extent original, that means that we do not know exactly what we are going to end up with, because we are not repeating something that has been done before, and that is associated with uncertainty. Psychologically, that uncertainty is experienced as risk, and in particular, either intellectual risk that asks whether we could learn those skills and ways of thinking that are necessary to get to our final end, and reputational risk that is asking, well, how are other people going to react? And those are the unknowns of the creative process by the very definition of it. So that is the very first thing that happens.
Is dealing with uncertainty, and yet what the goal is, and when I looked at what you did, I said, well, there might not be a blueprint for creativity or an emotion roadmap for creativity, but there is for the feelings associated with creativity. So while you're likely to experience a fair amount of uncertainty and also some anxiety, because I know when you set out to do something new, like even doing the live streaming I'm doing right now, you put your reputation at risk. And you have some possible embarrassment if things don't work out. If the technology didn't work, or we were somehow our conversation wasn't stimulating or interesting, so you worry about failure. and you worry about being embarrassed in front of people that you might care about what they think. But you talk about what you hope for at least an emotion where you want to be throughout the process, if possible, is something I loved, which is this idea of creative confidence. So can you tell people what that's about?
We start with feelings of uncertainty, but in the same time, creative confidence is the fuel that gets us going. It is the fuel that um, that that starts the drive and maintains us in motion until we get to our goal. Uh, so we know very intuitively that confidence matters because we tend to do those things that we believe in. But because creative work starts with uncertainty, part of that uncertainty is whether we can rise to the occasion ourselves. So there is self-doubt that is inherently part of the creative process. The good news is that creative confidence can be built, and it is most strongly built through experience. We decide to engage in a process. As every process, it starts with the first step. It starts with smaller tasks that build towards a bigger goal. And as we engage with those smaller tasks, we complete them. We realize that we are able to complete those. We can look back and say, well, if I did that, I can do the next thing that is on my journey. And that builds confidence. So it might seem, well, you build confidence just with more and more experience, and then you go from some relatively low number to 100%, but it doesn't really work like that because confidence is dynamic in nature. It responds to what goes on with our work. So if we make steady progress, it grows and it grows steadily. However, it is not uncommon to encounter obstacles or to encounter even full-fledged creative blocks. And at those times, creative confidence also is likely to fall, sometimes even precipitously, and we have to rebuild it yet over again.
Right. So confidence can be build, and continue to build confidence. And one of the things I know that you had said and what you wrote about was that, once you've had a successful creative accomplishment, an achievement of some kind, you have that belief in yourself that you faced obstacles in the past, you've dealt with uncertainty and anxiety and all the other kinds of unpleasant feelings that might be again, sort of speed bumps on your road to getting to where you want to go. But the concept for me, I think that talking about creative confidence is in part sometimes comes from the fact that once you've done it one time, you tend to have a stronger belief that, and you're able to deal more effectively with the unpleasant feelings that come by knowing that you've had success in the past.
I very much agree with that description. We cannot know exactly and cannot plan exactly how long it's going to take or every step of the way along that path of realizing an idea, but we can have an outline of the emotional side of it. And the emotional side will start with that uncertainty. It will have a component of self-doubt that can grow into confidence. But there are other parts, other emotional parts of that lay of the land that will include curiosity. Curiosity is going to push us, motivate us to look for different angles on what we are working on, different ways of engaging, different ideas. Then there is a part of empathy, empathy that makes us consider how the needs of other people. One of my favorite titles of a scientific article of all times is by Adam Grant, and the title is "Necessity of Others is the Mother of Invention." It is by putting ourselves in other people's shoes, we are realizing what problems are that maybe we are not experiencing ourselves, but we know it's an opportunity and the need for innovation. We also can anticipate that there's going to be frustration in the process. Coming back to the nature of the creative work as something that works towards originality, well, we are a little bit in a labyrinth. We are in a maze, and sometimes we end up facing the wall and having to retrace our steps, and that is frustrating. But in the process, we can learn, and the product in the end can be even more creative because of it. Constraints are very frustrating in their own right, but there is reliable research showing that they actually increase creativity of what we are working on.
One of the things that strikes me as I'm listening to you, and also in our earlier conversation and reading your book, is I love the idea of being creative. But I also, at one time, wondered, is it creative? Does creativity mean being something when you say original? Does that mean it's something that no one ever thought of before? And of course, we both agreed that that's not really possible. People have thought about lots of things, but sometimes it's, at least for me, the combination of things that exist but in new ways, putting them together in a different way, and in a way perhaps other people hadn't thought of before. And I think about the concept that this emotion roadmap I talked about, which was trying to understand. So we now know that there's such a thing as emotional intelligence. But what do we do with it? How does that help us in our lives? What's the pragmatic view of, now that we have a new science that says there are emotional intelligence abilities, what does that mean to us as individuals, as organizations, as teams, as divisions, as countries even? I was talking with somebody today who's listening, I know, who is from Georgia, the country of Georgia. And, how do we impact countries as well as companies and large organizations as well as small ones? And one of the things that struck me over the years was, I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with the Gallup organization. They constantly are testing, how people are feeling in organizations. And one of the things that they note is that engagement is often something in many companies that is really sought after. You want high levels of engagement with your employees, and engagement is an emotion. And if you're showing up in most companies, what they find across the world, only 20% is typical on average of companies that actually have most of the people, 20% of the people working really hard every day, really pulling for their company to be successful. That means 80% of the people aren't doing what they could. In fact, 15 to 20% might actually be so angry with their organizations that they're looking to sabotage them. So one of the things I've done in the last few years, working with a client that has become a wonderful client and friendship relationship at this point, is to create an emotionally intelligent culture, and try at the heart of what they were doing is to create a set of shared feelings. And in many organizations, this is not a new idea. They've called it shared values. And just as an example, respect as a value is nice to know that you have that with your company, that company's supposed to be respectful. But it's not the same as asking people, do you feel respected in this company? Or asking, as a representative of this company, are you respectful to your peers and to your bosses and your people that might work for you? Are you respectful to community members as a representative of this company, to vendors, to customers? It's a whole nother way of thinking about things. And it's the creative process in that sense with this company has been terrific. The results are great.
That's a great example. The social influences on creativity are great. And it starts with the atmosphere of psychological safety. It is one of those concepts that is talked a lot in our culture, but there are lots of misconceptions about it, either with ideas out there that it's this atmosphere of permissiveness and everybody has the right to say whatever they exactly think in a moment, but it is quite to the contrary, the atmosphere of respect and trust that one's opinions will be accepted and will be treated in a way that we do not have to fear any kind of direct or indirect retribution. So that becomes that emotional nutrient in the ecosystem. But then, as we all know, anybody who has ever worked anywhere knows that leaders create the experience of work for most of us and have an outsized influence on the climate and the culture in teams and in organizations. In my own work at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, we have looked at in a large study across the economy. So this was different industries, representative of the economy at large. And we asked people who worked full-time to describe how their leaders acted, specifically how they acted in relation to emotions. Did they notice how people were feeling? Did they try to motivate others and inspire? Do they understand how their own decisions are influencing the experience of work for their team members? And are they helping people deal with those frustrations and disappointments of work? And we have found that when leaders act in these ways, so when they act in emotional, intelligent ways, it makes a big difference for workers' experience of work, but not just their experience of work, also about what they do. And as they experience more positive feelings, they are feelings of a particular nature, feelings of being motivated, being challenged, yet fulfilled and loving their work. As a consequence of it is that they engage in more creative behavior and work and end up being more innovative in their jobs.
That's great. As I'm listening, I'm thinking about Helen Reese's work. Another colleague of ours is an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, and she has her own company called Empathetics. And Helen shared with us at the last consortium meeting some unbelievable statistics about how helpful it has been since her company has started to teach empathy inside large hospitals and organizations dealing with medical treatments and medical care. There's a tremendous burnout rate in a lot of places in the healthcare industry, as most people already recognize these days that have had to deal with the healthcare industry. And yet when she teaches people about being more empathic, and I love that there's several ways to define empathy. One is the intellectual empathy, which is understanding why you feel the way you do. Emotional empathy, feeling how you feel. And again, I shared this with you earlier today, Sharana. Dan Goleman once said that, what's really important is caring about how you feel. I once had this idea that, a lot of these companies that measure how people are feeling or what the morale is like in organizations do it like every other year, and they spend a lot of money on it. But what would it be like if you encouraged every leader at every level to think really hard about how is everybody on their team feeling every day? So you paid attention to it, and you asked people to care about that. That was one of the criteria you look for when you recruited people. And one of the reasons people got to stay was because they cared about each other. When you establish that, and it really becomes real, not just a bunch of words on a piece of paper or some PowerPoint, some presentation somewhere, but you actually experience that and feel that. Again, that's another really creative way of dealing with organizational life that increases how people feel about their workplace. Why would you ever want to leave that place?
Oh, exactly. That is a very important point. And what we found in our work is what the opposite of it is when leaders are not acting in these ways, when they are ignoring even the existence of emotions, if they have this really outdated notion of professionalism as leaving emotions at the doorstep as if that was possible. It is not. uh, the consequences are not just disengagement that you have mentioned, but we have found that the consequence is a lot of different feelings in the greater category of anger, from being irritated and aggravated to being mad, and also feeling of being unappreciated and underappreciated.
Right. So one of the things that I want to be sure to cover a little bit is that we talked about ways to build creative confidence and self efficacy, and you mentioned Bandora's work, I guess, and you said it was one, observe others, learn from our experience, notice how we feel, receive encouragement. And I had added one to it, and we talked a bit about this earlier too. And it's not just notice how you feel, but plan how you wish to feel in the beginning, middle, and end of the creative process. Because I think that's what I was saying, where there's not a blueprint about how to be creative, there is a blueprint about the feelings you're likely to encounter and ways you personally might want to deal with them based on your ability to deal with uncertainty in the past. What have you learned about yourself? How you deal with anxiety? How you deal with obstacles? How you deal with frustration? What are some things at times that you can remember in past experiences, not the same experience, but the feelings were similar, where you actually can plan how you want to be, how you want to experience those times when they show up, what you might do about it?
I think that's a very interesting way of putting it and quite an accurate way of putting it. We might not be able to experience only those feelings we desire to feel at a particular time, at the beginning, middle, and the end of the process. But because we never desire to feel frustration, for example, yet we will feel frustration at some point. But it's not necessarily about what we are feeling. It is what is crucial for creativity is what we are doing with those feelings that we have. And there are two really important kinds of things we can do with those feelings that we have. One is we can use them, we can harness their power to maximize what we are doing. And the other one, we can manage it. We can regulate our emotions to change their nature, change what we are feeling at a particular time, especially if it happens to be in our way. And I think it makes sense to spend little time on these concepts because they seem abstract in nature. What does it mean to use your emotions? Well, it means that different emotions are good for different kinds of thinking. Uh, so that in general, if we are in positive and energized moods, we are better able and more successful at coming up with lots of ideas and doing so quickly. And when we are in more subdued moods or more pessimistic moods, they are essentially a superpower of critical thinking. We can identify all potential problems and things that could be improved. And if you think of creativity as a process that includes both coming up with ideas and developing them and deepening them, we need both of these kinds of thinking. Therefore, we both need positive and energized moods and those more pessimistic ones. And you can plan. I like your concept of the roadmap and planning because, to give a personal example, I'm not much of a morning person, so I can plan around that. And my plan around it is that I am going to be pessimistic in the morning. So as I work on something that is being developed, and for example, a piece of writing. Um, in the first thing in the morning, I'm going to be most critical. I'm going to find all the possible ways to improve it. And by planning to do it in the morning when I know that generally I tend to feel this, I
Right.
am going to maximize my success.
That's great. All right, I'm about to run out of time, so I want to touch on a couple of things and just say something about them. I thought it was really interesting that when people are told we're looking for you to be creative regarding a task, they actually are more creative. I'm going to ask you to comment on a couple of these. So let me say, I just want to stop and say that that's one thing to really think about. Just actually telling people you want them to be creative generates creativity. Another thing that you had said that was really interesting to me was people are much more creative when they are constrained by what they are given to work with, as opposed to just create something and work with anything. And I think we used the example of like some of the cooking shows where you only have a certain set of ingredients and a team of really artistic and wonderful people who are good at creating recipes, but they have to each create something unique, and they all do it. They're actually more creative than if you had a whole kitchen and just said go do anything. And then you also mentioned the passion. And maybe you could say just a little bit about passion. And then I want to ask you if you can tell people about where they can find your book, because you've got so much more in there that we didn't talk about. A lot about on self-regulation, on ways that you can manage when you get to these parts of the process where you get stuck or feel frustrated, things that you can do to address that. And that's all in your book. And I really enjoyed reading it. And I'm very thankful we did this. But can you just talk a little bit about passion, because you have a unique take on that, and then tell us where we can get your book, Sarana.
You have touched upon quite a few things there, and thank you for highlighting some unexpected findings by, yes, just telling people that be creative, asking them to be creative, results in them being more creative, because essentially you're giving them the permission. You are showing them that it's expected and accepted. And when you talk about passion, we are clear, we are intuitively almost clear that passion is something that is a great motivator and great builder of creative drive. But we often get something quite wrong about passion when we talk about discovering our passion. When we speak about discovering our passion, the assumption is that it is already there. It is already in existence. It is part of us, and we just have to find it, uncover it somewhere deep inside. Quite to the contrary, passion is something that is developed, something that we can build from, oh, this is a vague interest to me. Let me learn more about it. Let me be curious about it. And by diving into rabbit holes, we truly develop passion. We all have experience with diving into rabbit holes. And once you start thinking it like that, it becomes clear that, oh, this is something that is developed if you try to engage with interests that can then grow.
That's very interesting. So there is some reason to dive into a rabbit hole after all. That's funny. Okay, so one other thing, how can people find your book, The Creativity Choice?
People can find the book wherever is your favorite place to find books.
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it. Search for The Creativity Choice, and it's going to pop. Do drop me a note if you check it out.
Okay. And also, I have to just say a little bit. One of the things that we didn't talk about, but I'd love you to know that's in her book, is the little engine that said, I think I can. There's a reference to that too, and as part of being creative. And we talked about, well, what if the little engine said, I feel I can? And maybe in today's world, the little engine might have. I do want to close with this as far as talking with you. And that is one of the things that I thought was really interesting was Thomas Edison What else would you like people to know about? I want to close with a quote from Thomas Edison that you characterize as reappraisal. He said he had not failed. He had simply found 10,000 ways that something did not work. And I kind of like that, because I think one of the things that we didn't really talk about is you got to be resilient around this stuff.
And we can have agency in relation to our emotions.
Okay. Well, so I think at this point, I'm going to say thank you, Zorana. And
Thank you.
I guess the call is ended. Okay. And I want to say thanks very much, Zorana, for being on. This was great. And I also want to just wish everybody a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. I hope everybody has a nice time. And one of the things that you might think about is I know that there's a lot of challenging conversations that happen in people's homes around Thanksgiving, because you're with relatives that you're not used to being with or friends, and maybe they have different opinions. And these days it's so hard sometimes when somebody really disagrees with you politically in a way that matters quite a bit to people these days. And it's hard to talk with them about it. So I don't know what your strategies are. I think you need different strategies for different households. But I think the thing to hold, in my mind, the thing to hold closest to your heart and what's most important is that these are family, these are friends that I care for, I love. I don't want this day to be ruined by disagreements. So if somebody says something I disagree with, I'll ask them to say what they say, ask if they're finished, and then move on. I may want to be kind and just repeat what I heard just so they know they were listened to, but not engage in conflict, not in the ways of engaging in conflict. That's not to say that you can't talk about it. Some families still can talk about things that are very challenging these days. But if your family is one of the ones that can't, I'd say enjoy the time together, enjoy the love that you share, enjoy being with one another, and focus on the things you have in common. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll be back in touch with you December 9th. And December 9th, I'm going to be on with Jack Mayer, who is the professor that both Zorana and the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence, Mark Brackett, both studied with about emotional intelligence. And Jack and I did some pioneering work in the late 1990s and early 2000s and creating this emotion roadmap and working with Jack and Peter Salovey and David Crusoe. So I wish you all a wonderful holiday season, and thanks for listening. I'm Chuck Wolf, and this is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Bye-bye, everybody.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government
come together.